The wind claws at the rigging as the ship rises and falls on a choppy Atlantic swell. Salt spray lashes the deck like gravel. A sailor, Oliver Devoe, chief mate of the Dei Gratia, keeps his eyes fixed on the vessel ahead, drifting at an angle that makes no sense. Her sails are partly set, but they hang wrong, torn in places, slack in others like a body dressed in rags. No signal flags, no answering shout, no movement at the rail. Devoe's boat bumps the hull. He hooks a hand onto the ladder and climbs. The deck is cold under his boots, slick with damp. The wheel stands abandoned. Rope trails in loose coils. Below, the air is stale, heavy wood, brine, and something sharper, chemical. They move from hatch to cabin, calling into silence. The ship is intact, provisioned, seaworthy, and yet not a soul remains. If the Mary Celeste is not wrecked, why has her crew fled? Why take the lifeboat, but leave food, water, and valuables behind? And what kind of terror can empty a ship without leaving blood, bodies, or a single cry in the log? What happened next would seal the Mary Celeste into maritime legend. But the story begins in the ordinary rhythms of commerce, family, and faith. In the autumn of 1872, Captain Benjamin Briggs is 37 years old, seasoned, respected, and known among sailors as steady in temperament. He is not the kind of man who gambles with weather or with lives. He is the kind who keeps a clean deck and a cleaner conscience. A captain who reads his Bible and expects discipline without cruelty. Briggs has reason to be hopeful. The ship, an American registered merchant brigantine named the Mary Celeste, has been refitted in New York, enlarged and rebuilt into a sturdier, more valuable vessel, roughly 103 feet long and about 282 tons after the rebuild. She is a working ship, not a warship. Her purpose is to carry cargo across the Atlantic and return with profit, and this voyage is meant to be profitable. The Mary Celeste is contracted to carry 1,701 barrels of denatured industrial alcohol, a volatile cargo intended for European industry and trade to Genoa, Italy. The hold is packed with casks, the paperwork prepared, the route planned, eastward toward the Azores, then onward toward the Mediterranean approaches. But the voyage is not merely business. Briggs makes an unusual decision, one that reveals something tender beneath the authority of a master mariner. He brings his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda, with him. For Sarah, the sea is not a romantic abstraction. It is wind that penetrates wool. It is damp that creeps into bedding. Yet she comes anyway because the alternative is separation, a life spent waiting for a sail on the horizon that may not return. The crew is small, the captain, his family, and 7 crewmen. The officers include First Mate Albert G. Richardson, Second Mate Andrew Gilling, and Steward Cook Edward William Head. 4 general seamen, among them the Lorenzen brothers, round out the working hands. They are described in later accounts as experienced and generally peaceable men who had signed on for wages, not violence. Near them in the same shipping world is another vessel, the Canadian brigantine Dei Gratia, commanded by Captain David Reed Morehouse. Morehouse is not a stranger to Briggs. The 2 captains move in overlapping circles of Atlantic trade, and later retellings emphasize that they were acquainted enough that the discovery of Briggs' ship would strike Morehouse with a particular unease. The late 19th century Atlantic is not a wilderness empty of law. It is a highway crowded with merchantmen, bound by salvage rules and maritime courts. When a vessel is found abandoned, a finder may claim salvage rights by bringing her to port. But salvage also creates suspicion. Whenever money can be gained, motives come under scrutiny. That legal and moral architecture will matter later, when the mystery is examined under oath. Before any of that, there is only departure. On November 7, 1872, the Mary Celeste finally leaves New York after delays in preparations. The harbor air is cold. The season is turning. Ahead lies the North Atlantic's shifting moods, gales, squalls, long gray days. Briggs expects hardship, but hardship is familiar. In one of the last known personal traces, Briggs writes with confidence about the ship's condition, in beautiful trim, as later summaries preserve. It is the voice of a man who believes he will return, because most captains do. Sarah settles into the small domestic world carved from a working ship. Folded clothing, bedding that must be kept dry, the private grief of seasickness if it comes, and the constant task of keeping a toddler safe amid rope, wood, and open water. The ship clears the coast and meets the Atlantic, an ocean that does not care about families. For 2 weeks, the Mary Celeste fights heavy weather pushing toward the Azores. Storms at sea do not announce themselves like thunderheads over land. They arrive as pressure, as the sudden thickening of wind, as a change in the sound of waves. Sails must be adjusted, lines tightened, the deck made ready. The ship is a living machine that must be tended constantly, and then silence in the record. The ship's log will later be found aboard, the last entry dated November 25. It places the Mary Celeste near the Azores, within reach of land, within reach of assistance, within reach of the world. No one on board knows it yet, but the voyage has already crossed its point of no return. The ship continues onward without them. What happened next would leave investigators staring at a ship that looked almost normal except for the one impossible detail: everyone was gone. Chapter 1. Hope and Routine. In the first days after departure, routine governs life aboard. The Atlantic is rarely calm, but it can be manageable: steady wind, disciplined watches, measured meals. Briggs, experienced and methodical, keeps the ship moving eastward. Officers check their instruments, sailors scrub and coil. Sarah attends to Sophia with the vigilance of a mother living among hazards. Below deck, the cargo of industrial alcohol sits in darkness, rows of barrels secured and stacked, breathing faint fumes through wood and seam. Denatured alcohol is not wine. It is not meant for drinking. It is treated, made poisonous or foul to prevent consumption. It is useful and dangerous. Every ship is a negotiation between human order and the sea's disorder. But in November, the ocean begins to press harder. As the days stretch into weeks, the Mary Celeste meets weather that strains even well-handled vessels. Chapter 2. First signs of trouble. Heavy weather does not need to destroy a ship to endanger it. It only needs to create uncertainty. Water finds its way into the lowest places. Pumps become the ship's heartbeat, worked regularly to keep the hold from filling. Later, when the ship is found, one pump will be discovered disassembled, suggesting trouble serious enough that the crew had begun repairs. Whether the pump failed first or was taken apart as a precaution is debated, but the image is chilling. A vital tool broken open on deck, as if someone set it down mid-task and never returned. The hold will also later contain about 3.5 feet of water, significant, but not necessarily catastrophic for a vessel of this size. Still, in the mind of a captain responsible for his family, significant might be enough. Then there is the air. Alcohol in barrels is not a silent cargo. It expands and contracts with temperature. Wood swells, shrinks, and breathes. Investigators later note that when the ship finally reaches Genoa, 9 barrels are found empty, suggesting leakage or seepage rather than theft. That detail becomes a cornerstone for later theories: fumes accumulating in the hold, creating fear of an explosion or a toxic atmosphere below. But even if fumes rise, a disciplined crew does not abandon ship for a smell alone. So something else must tighten the noose, something that transforms manageable risk into immediate dread. But the worst is yet to come. Chapter 3. The situation worsens: water, fumes, and fear. Imagine the ship in the gray half-light of dawn. The sea is restless. The deck is wet. In the hold, the cargo sweats its vapors. A captain listens not only to the wind, but to the ship herself. The groan of timbers, the slap of water below, the sound of a pump that should be steady but falters. Briggs is not merely responsible for a crew of men trained to endure. He is responsible for Sarah, for Sophia, a child who cannot cling to a line in high seas, a child who cannot understand why the world tilts and roars. The ship's log ends at November 25. After that, historians can only reconstruct possibilities built from later testimony about the ship's condition when found. When the Dei Gratia boards the vessel in early December, they find an unsettling combination: order and disarray together. The ship is seaworthy, supplies remain, personal belongings are present. Yet the lifeboat is missing, and the rigging shows damage: ropes hanging, sails in poor condition, some missing. That suggests weather rough enough to batter the ship, but not enough to sink her. Most telling, The missing lifeboat implies the crew did not vanish in a sudden act of violence or supernatural force. It implies they left deliberately in some kind of plan. And yet leaving a seaworthy ship is one of the last decisions any sailor wishes to make. A lifeboat is not safety. It is exposure, tiny, vulnerable, dependent on wind and luck. So what would make Briggs choose it? One widely discussed scenario centers on the cargo. Leaking alcohol creates fumes. In a confined hold, fumes can ignite. Some modern reconstructions argue that an alcohol vapor ignition could produce a violent pressure whoosh without leaving charred wood, frightening enough to make a crew believe a larger explosion is imminent. Even without flames, such an event could drive a captain to order everyone on deck and prepare to abandon ship temporarily. If Briggs believed the ship might explode, he might have opened hatches to vent. He might have ordered the lifeboat ready tethered to the ship as a precaution, so the crew could wait at a safe distance and return once danger passed. This is where small details begin to feel fatal. A lifeboat tethered to a moving ship is only as safe as the line. In squalls, lines part, not slip. A sudden gust can swing a boat broadside and swamp it. And if that tow line breaks, the ship sails on without them. No bodies are required, no pirates, no mutiny. Only wind, rope, and one panicked choice. But the record does not allow certainty, only probability. Chapter 4. Internal tensions, suspicion, leadership, and the psychology of abandonment. Another layer of conflict is not on the sea, but in the human mind. A ship at sea is an enclosed world. Anxiety spreads quickly. If the pump is failing, some crewmen might believe the ship is taking on more water than it truly is. If fumes rise, men may imagine an explosion. If weather remains hostile, each new wave becomes a verdict. And if Briggs's officers disagree, if Richardson argues one course while Briggs chooses another, tension could sharpen. Not necessarily into mutiny, but into the subtle fraying of confidence that makes decisive leadership harder. Later investigators in Gibraltar will wrestle with exactly this question. Was there evidence of violence or conspiracy, or was the abandonment a tragic chain of misunderstandings? When the ship is found, critical navigational items are missing: sextant, chronometer, and papers suggesting that whoever left intended to navigate the lifeboat, not merely drift. That points toward an organized departure. An organized departure implies leadership, and leadership implies a reason compelling enough to justify it. But then the story shifts, because the Mary Celeste is not discovered by chance alone. It is discovered by men who, by law, can profit from her emptiness. Chapter 5. Crisis Point, the sighting. On December 4057-2, depending on the reckoning of sea time versus land time, the De Gratia sights a vessel drifting in the Atlantic at roughly 38 degrees 20 Cest in 17 degrees 1571, about 400 miles east of the Azores. Her movement is wrong. Her sails are wrong. Her silence is wrong. Captain Morehouse watches through a glass and feels the first pull of alarm. He knows ships. He knows what a ship should look like when properly handled. This one looks abandoned. He sends a boarding party. Oliver DeVoe takes charge, with other men in a small boat. They approach cautiously, because an abandoned ship may still be dangerous disease, fire, hidden violence. They climb aboard. What they find is not a wreck. It is a mystery arranged like a stage set. The deck shows wear, damage to rigging, sails in poor condition, but the hull is sound. The cargo is intact. There are provisions and water remaining. Below deck, there is dampness. In the hold, that 3.5 feet of water. On deck, signs of a pump taken apart. And crucially, no lifeboat. They locate the ship's log. The last entry dates to November 25th. That means the ship has been drifting, unguided, for roughly 10 days. 10 days of wind and current steering her like an empty carriage across an ocean road. DeVoe searches the captain's cabin. A sword lies sheathed. Later, some will claim stains blood. But later examinations will undermine that dramatic suspicion, suggesting the blood was not what it seemed. Order and abandonment coexist everywhere, belongings present, yet critical navigation tools missing. A world paused mid-motion. Morehouse decides to claim salvage. Under maritime custom, he can bring the ship to port and seek an award. He divides his crew. Some remain with the Dei Gratia. Others take the Mary Celeste under a skeleton crew toward Gibraltar. A ship with no crew becomes a prize. But prizes attract suspicion. Chapter 6. Desperate decisions and moral dilemmas. Gibraltar's shadow, the Dei Gratia, reaches Gibraltar on December 12, 1872. The Mary Celeste arrives shortly after, delayed by fog. Almost immediately, the ship is pulled into the machinery of law, impounded, inspected, questioned. The investigation is overseen by Frederick Solly Flood, Gibraltar's Attorney General, a man described in later accounts as suspicious, determined, and unwilling to accept a simple answer. Flood does not see a tragic accident. He sees opportunity for crime. Under Flood's gaze, the Dei Gratia's crew shifts from rescuers to potential villains. Flood suspects deception, murder, piracy, conspiracy. He questions whether the ship was found where Morehouse claims. He scrutinizes the condition of the vessel as if it were a witness that cannot speak. Inspections note strange points cuts on the bow, damage that can be interpreted as collision or deliberate tampering. A dramatic narrative begins to form in official minds, one that would later be amplified by sensational retellings. Yet despite suspicion, hard evidence refuses to appear. No corpses, no stolen treasure, no clear signs of struggle. The cargo remains largely undisturbed. The crew's belongings are still aboard. If there had been murder, why leave value behind? If there had been piracy, why not take the alcohol worth money rather than vanish into nothing? After months of inquiry, the court finds no evidence of foul play sufficient to sustain Flood's accusations. But suspicion lingers in the public mind, and the salvage award is lower than expected, only £700, a fraction of the ship and cargo's value. The legal outcome is unsatisfying. It does not solve the mystery. It only confirms what the Atlantic had already declared. The truth is missing. And so the Mary Celeste becomes two stories at once, one of disappearance at sea, and one of investigation that cannot close its fist around an answer. But the real climax is not in court. It is out on the ocean where 10 people stepped into a small boat and were swallowed by distance. What happened next must be reconstructed like a map drawn from scraps. If the most plausible scenario is correct, fear of explosion or sinking, then the abandonment likely occurs around November 25, 1872, after the final log entry. The ship is near the Azores, close enough that land is a known presence, but far enough that a lifeboat voyage remains perilous. The moment begins not with drama, but with a decision. Perhaps fumes thicken below. Perhaps a sudden ignition produces a terrifying pressure blast. No scorch, only a concussion that rattles hatches and convinces even experienced men that the next spark will split the ship apart. Perhaps the pump fails or appears to fail, and water in the hold feels like the first stage of drowning. Briggs orders everyone on deck. Sarah gathers Sophia's small arms around a small body, pressed close against the wind. The crew lowers the boat. They take what matters for navigation: chronometer, sextant, papers, because if they must drift, they intend to steer. And then the most dangerous choice, to tether the lifeboat to the ship, staying close enough to return when danger passes. It is a decision made by sailors who understand that an intact ship is still the best refuge on the sea. They do not want to abandon her forever. They want distance. They want time. But the Atlantic gives no time. A gust tightens the tow line like a whip. A wave lifts the lifeboat and slams it down. The line chafes against wood or iron, or a knot gives way under strain. The rope snaps. From the lifeboat, the Mary Celeste is suddenly no longer a platform of safety. It is a receding wall of timber, moving under sail. Without hands at the wheel, she does not turn back. She does not slow. She simply continues, drawn by wind and current while the lifeboat falls behind, smaller by the second. On the ship, sails are still set. That is the cruelest detail. The Mary Celeste does not stop because no one remains to command her. She becomes a ghost that keeps walking. The lifeboat, by contrast, is fragile. Even if the sea is moderate, exposure kills slowly. Hypothermia and wet clothing, exhaustion from bailing, the torment of salt thirst. If weather worsens, and November Atlantic weather often does, waves could swamp the boat in minutes. No bodies are found. That too is consistent. In the open Atlantic, death does not always return evidence. It returns silence. Meanwhile, the Mary Celeste drifts for roughly 10 days, moving farther from the last logged position until she is spotted by the Dei Gratia. In Gibraltar, the case becomes famous partly because it does not resolve. Solly fled suspicions fuel headlines. Later writers expand rumors into legend: meals left on tables, clocks running backward, supernatural forces. But serious accounts return again and again to the same stubborn facts: missing lifeboat, missing instruments, water in the hold, disassembled pump, intact cargo. The truth may never be known. Historians debate which detail is decisive: the alcohol barrels found empty later, the condition of the hatches, the psychology of a captain protecting his family. Every theory must explain why experienced sailors chose the worst possible refuge, unless they believed the ship itself was about to kill them. The impact, however, is undeniable. The Mary Celeste becomes a byword for abandonment, a symbol of how the sea can erase human presence without violence, leaving only the shell of routine behind. And the ship herself continues for a time. She is released, sold, and sails again under different masters. Her reputation, however, is stained by the mystery. Finally, in January 1885, the Mary Celeste meets a different end, deliberately wrecked off Haiti as part of an attempted insurance fraud by her last captain, Gilman C. Parker. Even the ship's death is tangled with human greed, another reminder that tragedy at sea does not always come from storms alone. But the greater tragedy remains those 10 missing lives unrecorded beyond a log entry and a vanished boat. And in that pause, the Atlantic keeps its oldest secret: what it takes, it rarely returns. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their daughter Sophia Matilda, and 7 crewmen vanish sometime after the last log entry of November 25, 1872. No confirmed survivor ever testifies. No lifeboat is ever recovered. The official inquiry in Gibraltar, guided by Frederick Solly Flood and heard under Chief Justice Sir James Cochrane, cannot prove murder, mutiny, or piracy, and ultimately finds no decisive evidence of foul play. Yet the unanswered questions ensure the case never truly closes. The Dei Gratia's men receive a modest salvage award, £1,700, and carry the weight of suspicion long after the court's decision. The Mary Celeste herself sails on for years, as if refusing to become a tomb. Then, in 1885, she is wrecked intentionally off Haiti, an ignoble end for a ship that had already become legend. In the end, the mystery endures, not because it invites superstition, but because it reveals something stark about endurance. Human beings can survive cold, hunger, and fear until one moment of misjudgment, one snapped line, one wrong calculation turns the sea into an abyss with no witnesses. The wind still howls over empty decks in the imagination. Salt still stings the air, and a ship still drifts seaworthy, provisioned, carrying only absence. If you found this story compelling, there are many more forgotten tales of survival and tragedy waiting to be told.